Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Ambassador Ashraf Haidari, a former Afghan diplomat. He was ambassador in Sri Lanka and deputy ambassador in India and the United States. He is right now associated with the Arizona State University. He is also the founder and president of Displaced International, where his mission is to empower displaced populations worldwide. Ambassador Haidari, welcome, and thank you for speaking with Fair Observer.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you.
Today, we're going to talk about your homeland, Afghanistan, and it's
Sure.
again in the news because of President Donald Trump. He says that Bagram Air Force Base, or Bagram Airbase, should I say, should be back under American control. Now, for a global audience, can you briefly tell us where is Bagram Air Force Base, Air Base, who built it, and why is it considered so strategically important?
Well, Bagram Air Base is about 40 kilometers north of Kabul in the province of Parvan, and it was built in the 1950s with the assistance of the Soviet Union as part of the Cold War Afghan-Soviet Union friendship. And it is important because back then and also more recently, it served as a aerial, logistical, intelligence, surveillance, and even humanitarian evacuation, detention facility of enormous geostrategic importance. In other words, as a self-contained strategic city, it is a regional power projection platform right at the heart of Asia. If you imagine Afghanistan's location as a land bridge between South Asia and Central Asia, or if you also think of its importance in terms of the geography of the Middle East to the Far East, then Bagram Air Base is sitting right at the heart of these geostrategically important regions of the world.
Ambassador, so the Soviet Union built the base, and then years later, the horrific 9/11 attacks happened. The US ended up in Afghanistan. They extensively deployed their military equipment and assets at Bagram, and it was used for counter-terrorist operations. Then the US left in 2021. What is the current condition of Bagram Air Base?
Well, unfortunately, like I said, the Bagram Air Base has changed many hands from the Soviets to the communist regime backed by the Soviets when they were still in power. And then after their fall, the Mujahideen took over and fought over the control of the Bagram Air Base. And then the Taliban captured the base into northeast Afghanistan. The fall of the Taliban, in the wake of 9/11, the United States took over Bagram and built another major airway, some 12,000 feet in 2006 at a cost of $100 million, and built so many other facilities. And now, unfortunately, with the withdrawal of NATO US forces in 2021, especially when the US forces abandoned the Bagram Air Base in early July, shortly after the fall of the Islamic Republic, the Taliban took control of the Bagram Air Base, and that's where it stands now.
Everyone remembers the withdrawal of American troops in 2021 and how horrific the images were. Now, as an Afghan, and of course as a former Afghan diplomat, when you hear that the US wants to come back and reclaim control of Bagram, and then of course you've got the current Taliban administration saying that they will not let the Americans take the base, how are you reading the situation?
Well, first of all, as a matter of principle, Bagram Air Base is, a self-contained strategic city within Afghanistan, so that would foremost violate Afghanistan's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. So it is impossible to do so. under international law. But also we know that the Taliban and those that support the Taliban in Afghanistan, and those are state actors in the region, oppose that as much as they opposed U.S. NATO forces presence in Afghanistan before 2021 for a long time. But I, as an Afghan, speaking on behalf of the Afghan people, including the Afghan women who constitute more than 50% of the Afghan people, urge President Trump to really do the right thing, and that's to sponsor a UN-led conflict resolution process whereby all Afghan sides, including the Taliban, those reconcilable elements, are brought together to the negotiation table to iron out a sustainable political settlement. And it is only through that process, consistent with, of course, the regional consensus, and as well as the consensus that exists in the among the permanent members of the Security Council, that in Afghanistan, free from the threats of terrorism, extremism, drugs, and separatism, is an Afghanistan that helps bolster regional stability and peace, and also helps maintain international peace and security, including the U.S. Homeland Security. And so here we, as the suffering people of Afghanistan, urge President Trump to do the right thing, and as part of also his effort to hopefully be recognized for a Nobel Peace Prize. And I think Afghanistan is one place where you could do so if you brought all Afghan sides together to help establish a legitimate and inclusive government whose absence is, the matter of Afghanistan's challenges today. 6 crises that are intertwined, from, a political crisis of absence of a legitimate government, to gender apartheid, to economic collapse, to humanitarian crisis, climate change, and so forth, all of which, are intertwined, destabilizing Afghanistan, with implications for the region and implications for the rest of the world, and as well as the U.S. So that's a sustainable way of reaccessing the Bagram Airbase, where it's done more through collaboration, cooperation, and partnership with Afghanistan and Afghanistan's neighbors, as opposed to, somehow coercing the Taliban or others to just take over the control of that, airbase, and let the rest of Afghanistan fester, and let the rest of Afghanistan suffer. And I think that's not a sustainable way to reclaim Bagram. And the sustainable way to reclaim Bagram is to, basically pick up where the Trump administration left, especially the Doha process, to help restore sustainable peace and democracy and human rights and women's rights, all the achievements that the country, helped us, the Afghan people, achieve over a 20-year-long period.
Right. But Trump is also a deal maker. I mean, that's how he likes to call himself and position himself. Do you think he would find a way to maybe cut a deal or strike a deal with Taliban, where somehow the US does get basically access to Bagram again? Or do you think that Taliban are in no mood to make a deal, and they are going to find all kinds of ways to stick to their claims, stay in power, even if that means reaching out to other players like Russia, China? So how do you see this playing out, maybe in the next 6 months to a year?
Well, I mean, the Taliban at the end of the day are a non-state actor, and very much a proxy that is available for rent by any actor in the region and beyond. And that makes them a very unreliable partner. And it's so, as a result, hard to make a deal with them that is sustainable, because the United States ultimately wants, sustainable assurance that once they take over the base, that they would retain it on the long run. But the Taliban are not a partner that they could trust to do so. The only, of course, partner that they must and they did trust is the Afghan people, and that's why it was on behalf of the Afghan people that the Islamic Republic actually signed two agreements with the United States. One, the Strategic Partnership Agreement in 2011, and another, the Bilateral Security Agreement, under which, of course, the United States could take back the control if the United States helps sponsor a UN-led peace process that culminates into the formation of a legitimate and inclusive government representing all Afghans. Right now, the Taliban are sanctioned under numerous UN Security Council resolutions dated back to the 1998 to recent resolutions, and including, of course, arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court for the leader of the Taliban, as well as the chief justice of their de facto government. And so, by no means, given these sanctioned terrorists and extremists, they can be a reliable partner to the U.S. And I think that's the wrong route. The right one is, as I said, one that is done with the Afghan people, and further deepening the people-to-people ties between the United States and Afghanistan. It's also consistent with the rest of the regions, Afghans having maintained good ties with all of our neighbors peoples, including the Indians, we know that, and Pakistanis. Of course, we've had problems with the Pakistani governments and the military, given their destructive role in Afghanistan over the past 4 decades, and as well as Central Asians and the Chinese. And as a result, we invite everyone to think win in a way that, of course, we have a government that represents all Afghans. That's a win for the Afghan people. A government that works regionally in terms of opening up Afghanistan for trade connectivity, and as well as shared prosperity that underpins human security, and that's a win for the region, and as well as international community, including the United States, whereby Afghanistan becomes an active contributing member of the international community, not a land that is ruled by the Taliban, sheltering over 20 terrorist networks, including Al Qaeda, of course, TTP, IMU, targeting Central Asia, or ETIN targeting China, or ISKP targeting, of course, the region and beyond the region, and including the United States. So Afghanistan, we really urge the United States and actors in the region, especially India is the largest democracy, is a traditional friend of the Afghan people, to engage with the Afghan people, and as well as to engage with even the Taliban in a very constructive, sustainable, long-term way, so that they encourage the reconcilable members of the Taliban to come into a peace-making, peace-building fold, so that Afghanistan's six intertwined crises, which I pointed out, are finally ended, and that Afghan people enjoy the peace that has been elusive now for almost 5 decades.
I'm glad you've basically opened up the discussion and talked about India, Pakistan, Central Asia, and even Iran. And in fact, as we speak, Taliban's foreign minister or acting foreign minister is in India. He is in New Delhi. He will be meeting Indian officials. What role do you think India has to play in all of this?
Well, foremost, India shouldn't miss the forest for the trees. The forest being the Afghan people, the forest being institutionalization of democracy, pluralism, human rights, and women's rights. The trees being the Taliban. They're here today, they're not there tomorrow. And unfortunately, they're also there to be rented as much by India as by the adversaries of India, and the values that Indian people espouse, the values that I just pointed out. And so India should never, lose sight of that, and should always keep that fact in mind. Should, and also learn lessons from the pursuit of zero sums or zero sum policies that Pakistan has followed over the past 4 decades or so. If India does that, then it should play a constructive role whereby it encourages the Taliban to legitimize their governance. And that's done through, of course, a sustainable political settlement through peace talks, which unfortunately they abandoned. And of course, so that the United States, the Doha peace process, which started as Afghans, expected it to be a peace process, but ended up being a basically deal process where, unfortunately, Afghanistan was effectively transferred to the Taliban without, the presence of the Islamic Republic's representatives in a meaningful peace process that would bring about, a legitimate and inclusive government. So India, neighboring Afghanistan, knowing Afghanistan, and also still, I think, retaining the trust of the Afghan people, can and should play a role that facilitates that. And it should actively, not only bilaterally, but multilaterally, minilaterally, advocate for such a scenario to happen. And then it can choose to play a leading role, both working regionally under the Shanghai Cooperation Organization platform, which India is a prominent member of, as well as with other multilateral platforms, BRICS, for example, or REC, and also with Europe and the United States, which with which India still maintains a growing strategic relationship. So the Afghan people really count a lot on India, current government, future governments, and as well as the Indian people.
Let's talk about the country just west of India, Pakistan. Afghanistan and Pakistan have not had the best of relations, and they continue to have rocky relations with the Taliban and Pakistan not really getting along. There's disputes over the border. There's disputes about people with so many Afghans living in Pakistan who were basically deported overnight by Pakistan. But with news of the US wanting to retake Bagram, how do you think Pakistan is feeling? A, are they looking forward to this? And B, and maybe I'm being a little bit controversial here, but do you think Pakistan is actually supporting the US in coming back to Afghanistan to maybe try and find a way to curb Taliban and their proxies?
Well, foremost, with the people of Pakistan, like I said, Afghans befriend them. Afghans are welcomed. Their support, appreciated their support over decades, as they have provided humanitarian assistance and hosting large numbers of Afghan refugees over decades. But with the governments of Pakistan overwhelmingly influenced by the military, and it's the military that's the government and that controls domestic and as well as foreign policy of the country, the Afghan people do not trust them. And we consider the government, the military, responsible for Afghanistan's unfortunately destruction and the suffering of the Afghan people over the past, recent decades, at least since the fall of the communist regime. Pakistan, as the United States abandoned, of course, Pakistan, felt the void, and it could have played a constructive role in bringing together the 7 Mujahideen factions, which Pakistan effectively created, sheltered, and supplied in every way to bleed the Soviets. And then, of course, following that, Pakistan could have played a constructive role, but unfortunately it didn't do so. It basically divided the Mujahideen factions and ruled and influenced Afghanistan through unfortunately, a distraction of institutions, and never allowing long-term peace and stability to take root in Afghanistan. And the country played the same, even more destructive role in the wake of 9/11, while it allied with the United States to help the U.S., but it milked the United States some $34 billion using those resources to reconstitute the Taliban and redeploy them to effectively implement a terror campaign that daily targeted U.S. NATO forces as well as AMD safe Afghan forces and the Afghan people for 20 long years. And as we speak, over the past 4 years, Pakistan, as we know, has been effectively lobbying and advocating on behalf of the Taliban for their, government to be recognized, while only, criticizing one aspect of, or maybe certain factions of the Taliban that provide safe sanctuary for the Taliban of Pakistan to continue targeting Pakistan. So that kind of duality, duplicity of Pakistan is still there and is undermining, unfortunately, long-term stabilization of Afghanistan. It's also unfortunate that in this context, Pakistan has continued deporting large numbers of Afghan refugees, same refugees who have genuine fear of persecution under Taliban, and same refugees that have fled conditions to which now Pakistan, and I should also mention Iran, are returning them to the same conditions.
Ambassador Haidari, I want to talk about two major players in Afghanistan. That's Russia and China. Of course, Russia has officially recognized Taliban, and China is almost getting there. In fact, Taliban officials have met Xi Jinping in Beijing. How do you see both Russia and China playing a role here? Do you think they're going to counter American influence or maybe an American comeback? Is that how they're seeing it? Or do you think that they feel there is a need to legitimize Taliban so that engagement with Afghanistan doesn't come to an end?
Well, unfortunately, in the way in which President Trump has expressed his interest in Bagram has already provoked China and definitely Russia to some extent, and even, of course, Iran and Pakistan. In a recent meeting, they all opposed. I think this was in the Moscow format meeting on Afghanistan, at the end of which they issued a statement in which they opposed expressions of interest by President Trump in taking over Bagram. So that's already there, unfortunately. But the Afghan people also reject the way in which Russia and China have engaged with the Taliban, and as well as with even the way in which India has done. So we encourage all neighbors of Afghanistan that they shouldn't just ignore the people of Afghanistan and ignore the importance of sustainable peace and security in their own backyard by simply transactionally engaging with the Taliban in order to protect and ensure their short-term national security interests, which we understand, but they need to think about it in the long run, as opposed to just transactionally dealing with the Taliban on a day-to-day basis, because ultimately Afghanistan is not Europe, Afghanistan is not, of course, in Americas. Afghanistan is in the very immediate neighborhood of China, Russia, Iran, Central Asia, and of course India and Pakistan. So if the region wants peace and stability, right at the heart of it, so to speak, if they do ultimately wish to connect the different regions of Asia, and this, critically, strategically important part of Asia, then they all need to see eye to eye and work together through bilaterally and multilaterally under the platforms that they have established, whose very agenda is to do so, such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is quite concerned about, the intertwined threats of terrorism, extremism, drugs, and separatism, and much of that emanates from Afghanistan. So if that's the case, and that's on their very agenda on which they meet at a summit level, and also about which they frequently express concern, often express consensus, then they have to also walk the talk. They shouldn't keep talking, because it has been 4 years that they've talked and nothing has really changed under the Taliban, despite their encouragement, despite their engagement and support and withholding recognition. But the Taliban have only further consolidated power against the people of Afghanistan, and further isolating Afghanistan, as we recently know from the decree that banned the use of internet, basically completely isolating Afghanistan and completely, denying Afghan women and girls access to even online education. And just over the past 48 hours or so, I think there is, again, another ban on the use of internet in some parts of Afghanistan. So how can and should, the question to themselves is, they should tolerate a situation where a medieval terrorist extremist group rules over 40 million Afghans, many of them young, aspiring to integrate with the rest of the region, integrate with the rest of the world, have access to the same basic human rights, whether they're living in an authoritarian regime or under democracy such as India. Imagine the women of India to be completely imprisoned, or the youth of India like yourself completely disconnected from the rest of the world, or China's rise. Would it ever be sustainable if half of its population were imprisoned and the country completely isolated from the rest of the world and so forth? So if they don't wish all of that for themselves, then they shouldn't wish it also for their own immediate neighborhood. I think that's not consistent with their vision and mission as far as sustainable peace and security in their immediate neighborhood. And I think the charity begins at home, so to speak, and so they should work together on foremost securing their neighborhood. They shouldn't wait for other powers to come and do so, and they did. I mean, to their credit, the United States and NATO allies did their best. It was unfortunate that this very region undermined them by supporting the Taliban, and that was led by Pakistan to bring Afghanistan to the brink as it is today now, threatening the region and threatening the rest of the world.
Ambassador, my final question to you is, what do you think is the way ahead? I mean, right now in Afghanistan, power flows through the barrel of the gun, and right now Taliban are holding that gun. How do you think other nations like India, the US, the EU, Russia, how do you think they should handle what's happening in Afghanistan?
Well, one choice is the status quo, basically maintaining transactional, engagement with the Taliban, serving their core short-term national security interest. That's to have a, security intelligence presence, whether to just look after their interests or whether to, use the Afghan soil against their adversaries. More of the same over the past, and that only helps the Taliban further, consolidate power against the Afghan people, driving more of the Afghan people across Afghanistan's borders, and as well as exporting terrorism, extremism, drugs, none of which, whether as refugees or the threats that I mentioned, would help any of the countries in the region, or by extension further afield, Europe and here Americas, or basically learn from the lessons of the past 20 years, and of course the past 4 years, that despite the hope that the Taliban changed, the Taliban 2.0, they've not changed. They've changed for the worse. They're only more lethal, more dangerous, and more threatening regional stability and international peace and security. And for this, I think it's a matter of principle. There are more than adequate UN Security Council resolutions, as I pointed out, under which the international community, major powers, including those in the region, should act, and that's through the sponsorship of a UN-led conflict resolution peace process, which is inclusive, which includes the Taliban, and invite the other Afghan sides to come together and complete, where they'll have basically left. They should, pick up and continue talking to form a legitimate and inclusive government, which would maintain friendly win-win ties with the region and as well as with the rest of the world. And when that happens, when sustainable peace and security is returned to Afghanistan, only then investors from the region could safely invest in Afghanistan. Traders could use Afghanistan as a connectivity ground. And also the U.S. could come back in a very meaningful, long-term way to take over and work with Afghan the military under the SBA and the BSA that I pointed out, operate bases such as Bagram.
Ambassador Haidari, Afghanistan is a young country. It's a beautiful country with really welcoming and warm people. So I'm very optimistic about the Afghan story. Thank you very much for taking out the time and speaking to us. And I hope that we're able to speak again, because I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon. I think the interest for Afghanistan is only going to pick up from here, especially with Donald Trump in office. So I would be glad to have you back.
It's very important that we keep this conversation going, helping inform and educate the peoples of the region, and especially including, of course, those in Europe and here in the United States, because at the end of the day, what happens in places like Afghanistan, as we remember from 9/11, affects the rest of the world. And so that's why it's important to adopt the right policies that are win-win-win, policies that are impactful and sustainable, not basically repeating more of the same blunders as the Afghan suffering people of Afghanistan have experienced, witnessed, and unfortunately paid for a heavy cost in so many ways. And thank you for this conversation, which we will definitely continue.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.